We have some time for clarifications. Mr. Desmond Chu.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask SMS Koon a couple of clarifications. It is very reassuring that our senior workers' employment rate is comparable to the OECD countries. Would it be useful to have a target employment rate for these senior workers? And what measures beyond SEC and PTRG might be needed to have more employers to hire senior workers? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I thank Mr. Desmond Chu for the question. As he mentioned, and as I shared in my speech earlier, we do have quite a good employment rate for senior workers compared to OECD countries and other advanced Asian economies. In looking at whether we should set a target to hit for senior worker employment, I think it's important to realize that every senior worker, every senior, in fact, in Singapore has different aspirations in life. Some prefer to really take care of their grandchildren, and some may want to do more of things that they haven't been able to do when they were younger. And I think it's very hard for us to set a hard target and force everyone to continue in employment against their wishes. This is on the background that we are already not doing too bad compared to other advanced economies. What we are trying to do here then, in response to your second question, which is related, is to create an enabling framework to allow as many senior workers as possible to remain in employment if that is their aspiration to do so. So by progressively raising re-employment ages and retirement ages to give them the legal protection to remain in employment should they choose to do so, making sure there's fair employment practices and a legal framework to prevent discrimination against ageism. That again also helps protect them and allow their aspiration to be realized. And then some of these other measures, whether it's senior employment credits, whether it is part-time re-employment grants, that helps to reduce friction. If employers feel that cost may be a consideration, we want to take away as much of those worries as possible from the employer side to give them an extra leg up to be able to get employment opportunities. But ultimately, what's important is to make sure our senior workers continue to upskill themselves. They must ultimately have the skills that the industry needs in order to be able to access employment opportunities. So it's a whole suite of efforts that we do from all angles. And some of the things that we're doing with the tripartite partners are also going to be helpful, helping them to do a structured career planning, making employers and HR professionals be attuned to the need to look at job redesign, having a conversation with the workers before they reach a retirement age in their 40s and 50s to start planning for the next lap of their career, so that even as they enter their 50s and their 60s, they understand what the company wants, and there is a concerted effort from the employer and HR side, as well as the workers, to develop skills that are relevant to the company's longer-term objectives. So it is a whole suite of effort, and I think at this moment, we are all in the correct direction that we're moving towards. Let's continue to push on what we're doing now, and hopefully, with the trajectory that we're seeing in the senior employment rate, we'll continue to hit an even higher level in the next few years to come. And as I said before in my speech, despite the pandemic and the economic crisis, our senior employment rate has actually gone up and not declined. So I think that's something encouraging that we want to pursue. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Gerald Giam.
I thank the Minister for replying to my questions on the shortage occupation list. Two clarifications on that. Will the Ministry also publish a shortage occupation list for skilled trades, industrial jobs, and other essential occupations? For example, the UK's shortage occupation list includes welders, care workers for seniors, daycare managers, healthcare workers. These are also occupations which are in short supply in Singapore. So can MOM then use this to work with the industry and educational institutions to close the skills gaps in our local workforce? The second question I have is that I know that the Minister said that the SOL will be refreshed every 3 years. I'm not sure if this is sufficient given the fast-evolving job market. Could MOM update the SOL more frequently to ensure it stays relevant with the constantly evolving job market and circumstances? Thank you.
I thank Mr. Giam for his 2 points. To clarify, given the small size of our markets and the ability for different sources of workers, the countries where the workers come from, given the fact that for the shortage occupation lists, let me rephrase that. Given the small size of our market, it is relative compared to many of the other bigger countries in terms of the workforce. So if we were to publish the list and make it so open, in many of these countries, they will then understand what are some of our vulnerabilities. So to that extent, I would rather keep the list to a very tightly narrow scope where we work very closely with MTI, with MND, with health, and with the different sectoral agencies to script it out and work through these agencies to address some of these sectors that have shortages. So that's the first point. Now, to your second point about a 3-yearly review, we also want to provide a certain level of certainty and predictability to businesses setting up here or businesses that's already operating here. If we keep moving this list very frequently, I think businesses will find it very hard to adapt, to respond, and to be nimble. So the 3 years, we feel, is a sufficient runway for us to address some of these shortage occupation lists. And as I've already shared in my earlier speech, what are some of the criteria that we would put in place, just to reassure the member that between MTI and ourselves and some of the other sector agencies, as I mentioned, we also conduct yearly reviews. So in the event that we find that we don't have to go through the full 3 years, but within that 1 year, certain shortages have become even more acute, we will not hesitate to respond. I hope that addresses your points.
Mr. Saktiandi Supaat.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank Minister for his answers to my cards, as well as to some of the suggestions I've raised during my budget debate speech on retirement adequacy. I have one clarification I would like to ask Minister. Is in regards to the CPF Life escalation plan. So it's a bit specific. It's in regard to my concern that with the rising prices and inflation, and of course my concern about the longer-term equilibrium inflation outlook that Singapore or globally facing, and how seniors will be affected. As of now, the CPF Life escalating plan rises by about 2% payouts annually. So my suggestion in my budget debate speech was to suggest whether it can be increased by another 50 basis points or possibly another 1 basis point to take into consideration the rising prices for the current cohort and probably future cohorts as an option beyond the 2% option that we have now, as an additional option or as a revision to the current 2%. Thank you, Mr.
I thank the member for his clarification. The CPF Life escalating plan has a lower start, but over time, it actually exceeds the standard and the basic plan as we speak today. Today, we are in an era where inflation is high because of the geopolitical uncertainties. We've also sort of seen the global supply chain disruptions, as well as a lot of interest rates tightening. Our broad initiatives, our broad measures that we put up today will allow the adequacy over the medium to long term. During times of shocks, such as what we're going through the last 2 years and what we're still going through, the government has constantly come in, intervene. You've had the assurance package, the GST voucher has become a permanent GST voucher, and there were, I think, a whole slew of support schemes that's been put up to support all Singaporeans and, of course, our CPF members to tide through this particular period. So you could sort of see the MOM schemes in terms of CPF, financial retirement adequacy, as a long haul, a very long period of time to provide that basic retirement adequacy. And at certain times, if I may borrow a term, it's like an immunization. You get a booster coming in from the government to help to uplift the members' retirement and the lifestyle, and in smoothing out some of the expenses. So if you look at the measures that we've rolled out over the last 12 months or so, for the low income, the coverage is very substantial, and it covers practically all of the inflationary increases in terms of spending. For the middle income, it covers it substantially. I think that has been the construct thus far. I hope that addresses your point. Thank you.
Ms. Hazel Phua.
I have two clarifications. First is, will the new workplace fairness legislation cover platform workers? And secondly, the minister gave us the proportion of CPF members who meet the basic retirement sum just now. Can the minister also tell us the proportion who can meet the full retirement sum? Thank you.
I think to your first clarification, the answer is yes. For the second clarification, in terms of the full retirement sum, if you can let one or two other clarifications go through, I'll come back to you. Thank you.
Ms. Yewanding.
Chairman, I would like to reiterate that there are about 260,000 women of economic age not in the workforce today. They will be a formidable workforce tap for Singapore should we create the right conditions for our women to return to work. I'd like to thank MOS GUN for acknowledging the work that the Labour Movement and the NTUC Women and Family Unit has done. I would, in addition, like to ask the SMS, how can the government further the partnership with the LM to support women who are seeking employment? Also beyond the EEC, the Enabling Employment Credit, what other employment support is there for persons with disabilities?
The government has been working in close partnership with NTUC and the unions to support women employment, and I have named quite a few. Looking forward, we think that there are more opportunities for the government to work with the unions, especially the women union leaders, to form mentorship circles, to expand our partnership with other women's groups and like-minded groups to cast our net wider to be able to reach out more women. As for support for persons with disabilities, there is an Enabling Master Plan 2030. I mentioned earlier on that there is also a separate task force that has been formed. I believe MSF will also be sharing the details when ready. Thank you.
Mr. Leong Mar Wai.
Thank you, Chairman. And I have three questions for the Minister. But before that, I'd like to thank the Minister for answering all my questions except one with very direct and succinct answers. I usually don't get that from most of the other ministers. But however, we have to continue to work on improving the situation for Singaporean workers, because while the job situation has kind of improved because of the opening, job and wage growth is still very uneven. For example, even MOM admitted that out of the 47,400 job growth in the fourth quarter of 2022, most of that was actually from the non-residents. And there are some complaints from IT graduates that they are unable to find jobs as soon as they want. Okay, so I have three questions. First, the question that the Minister didn't answer me. Can I ask the Minister, what makes him and the policymakers so certain that the Singaporean PMEs are not disadvantaged, although employers do not need to contribute CPF for the EPs? First question. Second question, can I ask whether the minister will consider accelerating the income increase under the PWM so that lower income workers can get a minimum of $1,800 of monthly take-home pay by 2024? Looking at the materials that was distributed by the minister, the lower income workers will get that by 2028. But that is far too long, 5 years to wait, bearing in mind that many of these workers also suffer considerably during the pandemic. Last question, does the minister expect Singaporeans to occupy a larger share of our IT jobs going forward, especially in the higher positions in the next 5 years, given that the number of IT graduates, local IT graduates, have increased, will be increasing significantly over the next few years? Thank you.
I thank Mr. Leong for his 3 to 4 clarifications, but can I humbly request for me to address Ms. Hazel Pua's point? After all, you're from the same party. Just on the second part, so let me sort of set the entire context by giving the full response. So over the last 10 years, the proportion of active CPF members attaining their cohort basic retirement sum at age 55 has improved from about 5 in 10 to almost 7 in 10 today. So we expect this number to increase to about 8 in 10 in 2027. Now, for the active members who are able to set aside the BRS, so those members who are able to set aside the BRS in 2022, about 7 in 10, about 70%, can choose to set aside the full retirement sum. To your first point, I wish to sort of make an amendment that was on your part about whether platform workers are covered by the workplace legislation. The WFL, the Workplace Fairness Legislation, needs to have a formal contract, a formal relationship between the employer and the employee. I think the nature of the platform work is that many of the platform workers have multiple platforms that they work for. So you could be on one, you could also be on another. I think some of them have about 2 or 3. Perhaps SMS Koon would be better placed to respond because of his deeper knowledge. So in that sense itself, it is not, I mean, to sort of say that it is a singular relationship between an employer and an employee, the nature of it is not a like-for-like comparison. But what we will do is that the TGFEP will be clarified further to include the discrimination of platform workers. Now, to Mr. Leong's 4 points, I hope that Mr. Leong, thank you for that compliment. It is really the collective work of all of my colleagues in the Manpower Ministry, and I've also learned a lot from my learned colleagues here in their responses and replies to your questions as well. So if you look at it, we are at almost full employment. I mean, we are at 3% above pre-pandemic. This is 3% above 2019. I mean, at a point in time when our resident employment is at this kind of high level, for companies to want to grow, to fulfill orders and so on, they have to hire workers. So obviously in the fourth quarter, you see more non-residents finding jobs. Now, to your point about how certain am I that Singaporean PMEs are not disadvantaged because the e-pass holders, the employment pass holders, the employers don't have to contribute to CPF. Please refer to my numerous explanations in the past that the way we calculate the minimum qualifying salary is after taking into consideration the gross salary of a local on a similar cohort, plus the CPF contribution of the employer, and we set that as the benchmark. So just if you look at it from the perspective of someone who has been here for 10 years, the salary of that E-Pass holder is on a rising scale. It will not be at 5,000. The EP holder, for him to be able to get the E-Pass, he would have, the company would have to set that qualifying salary probably at above $10,000. So with that, we believe that we have adequately addressed any form of income disparity between our local versus foreign. On top of that, we don't see a need for us to ensure that foreigners have to contribute to CPF, because our CPF provides for retirement adequacy, housing, a roof over the heads of our Singaporeans. We don't see the need to provide the same level of safety net for foreigners. Hence, we don't impose the CPF contribution on them. To your point about the larger share of IT jobs, how to accelerate the income for PWM, I will leave it to SMS Zaqy to answer your question. But to your last point about how do I ensure that the larger share of IT jobs in high positions will go to Singaporeans in the next 5 years. We will continue through all of the programs that I've been painstakingly elaborating on over the last 2 days. Whether it's the SGEP, the Global Ready Talent, the Tech at SG, these are all programs that we set up to train, to invest, to upskill and to reskill our Singaporean core talent. And we will continue to do so. And if you have, Mr. Leong, even more constructive programs that we can do to train, to upskill our Singaporean core, I'm happy to also take that into consideration. But the nature of whether I can provide some form of guarantee over the next 5 years, whether they will all end up in high positions, I don't think anyone can guarantee that. We can guarantee a level playing field as of the outset at every single level, but I don't think anyone can guarantee a similar high outcome or success for everyone. I hope that answers your question. Maybe SMS Zaqy? Thank you.
Thanks, Minister. I just want to bring members back to this infographic that we shared, which Mr. Leong shared, which I thought was really quite clear. That actually most of your PWMs that you see here are pretty much above 1,008 for most of them. I mean, and you look at the wage growth, for example, I take security that 2,585 2023 today. And by the time you hit 2028, it's 3,005. The kind of wage growth is quite significant, 56%. Landscape workers, 1,007, admittedly maybe below 1,008. Cleaning, it's 1,570, but by 2028, you get 2,004. That's an 84% wage increase in 5 years. So there is a scheduled step, but at the same time, you can almost be guaranteed that almost all of them, in fact, all of them will exceed 1,008 as a start. But let's also not forget that the government's approach goes beyond just wages too. We forgot to include workfare, which, if you think about $4,200 a year, that's about $350 per month. In addition, depends on your age and criteria, but generally you could get as much as that. That covers about 25% of your wage, in addition, topped up by government. So if you look at total income, I think let's look at entirety. But I have to credit, the union as well as the employers as well for standing with us on this, because the last 2 years have not been easy. We've just come out of the pandemic, but yet to see both the labour movement and the employers agree to such aggressive pay increases, I think that speaks volumes of our tripartite movement in terms of supporting our low-wage workers and standing in solidarity with them. I think that's quite critical for us to remember that we're still coming out of the pandemic, and yet we are agreeing to wage increases of 56%, 84%, and significant numbers. So, but we have to also be realistic that, to push any further, I don't think the employers can take it. So you have to keep watch, but that's why the government also supports them through the PWCS. So I just thought to set the context, but rest assured, we are all on the same page. We are here to support our low-wage workers. Thank you.
So very quickly on the clarification on platform workers and whether it's covered by the workfare legislation that's being planned. The answer is no, because workfare legislation only legislates employer-employee relationship. And I did spend a significant part of my speech earlier to say why we are not classifying platform workers as employees to maintain flexibility that both parties desire. But having said that, as I said in my speech before, the tripartite guidelines for fair employment practices will scope in a clearer statement to say that any discrimination, even of contracted workers, would be deemed to be in violation of the tripartite guidelines for fair employment practices, and MOM can investigate and take administrative penalties on these platform companies if they do discriminate. The other thing which I hope perhaps members will realize is that it is not in the interest of the companies to actually eventually discriminate workers who do not, who opt in for CPF, simply because the scheme we're trying to propose here is by 2024, those who are below 30 years old will be mandatory required to contribute to CPF, which means that henceforth as a cohort, all younger workers born after the year 1995, whichever time point they choose to enter platform work by the time they are 40 years old or 50 years old, so long as they are born after the year 1995, platform companies will need to contribute CPF for them. In other words, over time, the bulk of the workers available for platform work will need mandatory CPF, and therefore it is not in the company's interest to disadvantage this larger group of workforce that will then constrain their ability to get labor. Thank you.
Mr. Leong, we'll circle back to you. There are 3 members that have yet to ask clarifications. Mr. Louis Ng.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate MOS shared that we're not ready to legislate parent care leave yet, but can I ask at least that we consider tripartite standards or tripartite guidelines on paid parent care leave? Second, could I ask what are the reasons as to why the government provides parent care leave to public servants and how those reasons don't apply to all other workers? Thank you.
Well, I'd like to reiterate that the government recognises that caregiving for parents is an important responsibility, especially with Singapore's ageing population, and all of us here who have parents will agree the same way too. We are committed to providing caregivers with the necessary support so that they can fulfill both their work as well as caregiving responsibilities. But beyond legislation, which Honourable Member Mr. Louis Ng has suggested, it's actually useful for us to take a step back and ask ourselves, for caregivers, especially of elderly parents, what would be more sustainable support for them? Would just 1 or 2 more days of parent care leave make a lot of difference? Or is it something that is more sustainable in the form of family-friendly workplace culture that would be more useful for these caregivers? The government encourages employers to have family-friendly practices, and the public service leads by example by providing the parent care leave for our own employees. And we hope that other employers out there will do likewise, care for their employees, have family-friendly practices, and provide the flexibility that the employees need to care for their elderly family members. Now, the government also has strengthened other areas of support for caregivers of seniors, including those who have to juggle between work and caregiving. Caregivers can tap on a range of care services, such as home and daycare, to support the day and social needs of their elderly loved ones. There are also various respite care options in senior care centres and nursing homes to help caregivers to look after their seniors for short periods of time, including over the weekends. So we do look at more holistic set of support for caregivers of elderly and not just pin on a few more days of parent care leave. Thank you.
Mr. Edward Chia.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to thank SMS for Zaqy for actually announcing that MOM will actually launch a ITM for HR professionals. I really feel that this really supports HR professionals in the expanded role. And also note that he mentioned the IHRP also has certifications and playbooks. I'd like to further ask if there are further support for HR professionals in the area of job transformation, change management, redesign, so they can better support their organization in the future of work and also execute business transformation. And also, he also mentioned ISRP has skills badges for HR professionals. May I ask how many HR professionals has attained these skills badges, and what are the plans to expand this initiative? Thank you.
I thank the member for his questions. I think they're very useful, and especially one I hope the HR committee appreciates in terms of development that we put in. I'll start with the skills badges. So between 2021 and 2022, IHRP awarded over 2,400 skills badges, equipping HR professionals with skills in various competencies and such as talent management and strategic workforce planning. So as for the appointed skills development partner for HR, IHRP will work with the industry to identify new skills gaps, and will continue to refresh the skills badges to keep up with emerging trends. To the member's second question, well, in terms of the work that we do with playbooks and HR certification, the job transformation maps, developed together with industry, support employers and HR in their job transformation efforts. I think that's something that we think will value add to our HR community. So it lays out, each of the JTMs provide detailed insights on the impact of technology and automation on the industry and the workforce, as well as pathways for employers to transform jobs, give opportunities to workers to acquire the requisite skills. And, today there are about 10 JTMs that have already been completed, including one for HR, and there are 8 more being planned. So in addition, WSG and HRP are working to set up a job redesign center of excellence, which will work with sector agencies and trade associations. And this was important because we want to help to point to companies, what the resources are that are relevant to their job design needs. So this, I hope, will help the HR community to work towards redesigning of jobs, as well as helping them through some of this digital transformation. And this, I think, remains a key enabler towards sustaining business transformation. So I also encourage, especially for digital transformation, HR community can also tap on IMDA CTO as a service scheme, the HR Tech Transformation Scheme, as well as the Productivity Solutions Grant. So there are various government grants that are available to support our HR community, and I hope that they find these useful and work towards great transformation for the businesses. Thank you.
Mr. Yip Hon Weng.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a short clarification. I wish to ask the Ministry, given the current high inflation environment, whether is it a good time now to increase the senior worker CPF contribution rates, as this will add to business costs for companies? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, we understand that employers may be concerned about the impact of business costs, as the member has asked. Therefore, the increase in employer contribution rates is at a gradual pace, not exceeding 1% point a year. And we are doing this at the early time to give employers ample notice so that they can adjust and manage the impact on business costs. Now, to mitigate the rise in business costs due to the increase in CPF contribution rates in 2024, we will provide the CPF transition offset, as we said earlier, so that this will help mitigate some of the cost pressure they face. We also expect business cost increase arising from the increase in senior worker CPF contribution rate to be modest due to the lower percentage point increase compared to the previous increase in 2022 and 2023. So the offset will certainly help in this current tranche of increase that we're planning to do. And all this offset that we give for the CPF increase is on top of all the other schemes that we have been giving to support older worker employment, like the senior employment credit and the part-time re-employment grant. So all these will help to ameliorate the cost impact on any older workers that the company employs. Thank you, sir.
We're approaching guillotine time, so I'll take the last 2 clarifications. Mr. Leong Man Wai and Ms. Yeo Wan Ling.
Thanks, Chairman. Just a further clarification from my question just now. One, first of all, the PWM, thanks the MOS for the reply, but I think he has not compared like to like what PSP has recommended in terms of the living wage is $1,800 take-home pay. But the figure shown on the material is actually gross salaries. So I just want to clarify that. And also I want to ask one more clarification with the MOS is that if the government is already contributing more in terms of WIS, why don't just add the WIS into the salary and then make it a clear one policy living wage? Okay, so that's one question. The other question I want to clarify with the minister. Of course, Minister, I have got that answer from you before, but I think we have not exhausted the discussion, so let me carry on with that. In terms of
I'm afraid, Mr. Leong, it's not time for discussions. It's time for clarifications.
Yes, clarification.
And this is your second bite of the cherry, so I'd ask you to keep it concise and short, please.
Yeah, thank you very much.
In fairness
Chairman.
to the whole House.
Yes, okay. Yeah, so can I ask that the salary component that you talk about, that you have adjusted the salary of the EP so that it is comparable with Singaporeans having to pay CPF, but the EP doesn't have to pay CPF. Do you think that is a strong enough deterrent, really? Don't you think that, or do you think that the recommendation made by us, imposing a levy, will be a better solution? Thanks.
You know, I'm not sure how much more I have to go through the sheet. But, you know, we already have a schedule, and every single one of these items here will be past 1,008 for sure. And, you know, I don't know how you want to define your living wage, but anyone can put a number. Or like what I've said, what's different between our approach and what you say? Anyone can put a number. Is it 1,008, 1,006, 2,005? Name it lah. But the difference is that, you know, in our approach, you know, the employers and the labor movement come to consensus. Basically means when we put a number down here, it is something that employers say they can bear. The market can absorb this. And the wage growths here are already as aggressive as I think anyone can do during COVID. I mean, you have to be very fair to employers in the market. So, you know, if I said, look again at the wage growth, 84% for cleaners, 56% for security officers, you know, 45, 60%. I mean, it is quite aggressive as it is. So to a large extent, I just want to say this again, bear in mind the market conditions which we operate in. At the same time, our approach is, you know, one that I think is fair, balanced, one that the market is prepared to pay. The employers have all agreed to this. And the schedule is transparent. And therefore, you know, to a large extent, I think bearable by the market, supported by government. And whether you put workfare into this or not, I mean, honestly, what really matters to the workers is what they get in their pockets every month. And that's where, you know, we have to put it in place, you know, various measures. And this is not the only measure, because the government also provides other schemes, including ComCare, civil support, and the whole slew of government grants that goes into our workforce to support our low-wage workers, including healthcare subsidies and housing subsidies, education subsidies. So the government puts a lot of commitment, and that's where I think we show how we care overall, you know, not just in terms of living wage, but every other support and subsidy you can think of the government can provide. So, sir, you know, I just want to say, you know, anyone can put a number, but I think what's key is whether you can deliver and you can execute. So that's where our focus will be in the next coming years. Thank you.
Minister Tan See Leng.
I'm sorry, Ms. Yeo. I think we just need to get this thing off. Mr. Leong, I think in the interest of time and so on, I'll try and keep it short. But actually, all I can do is just refer you back to the Hansard for you to read the thing, and the position hasn't changed. But I think it's late. You've asked quite a number of questions. I just want to sort of address some of it. Now, your approach that you talk about in terms of imposing hard caps on the number of foreigners from each nationality that a firm can hire, I think the approach is very, very rigid, and it's overly so. I've been in private sector all my life, and I've also set up businesses in many countries. I think if you do that, many of my own networks would probably give this place a miss. The reality is that if you structure an industry, you want to grow the industry, it's a combination of making sure that we invest in our people. At the same time, we are also able to imbibe, the word is imbibe, not open the doors and let them in freely, but imbibe enough talent so that they can actually complement our local talent and we all then prosper together. I think that is a more nuanced approach. We have introduced Compass, and Compass takes a very nuanced position by incentivizing firms to strengthen their local core and the workforce diversity. And we also still ensure that in the event that these companies need the additional talent, which you see is the common and recurring theme around our debate for the last many days. There are many, many MPs on both sides of the House who keep telling us and lamenting on how tight the talent situation, the manpower situation here is in this country. So we want to ensure that they still have access, these companies still have access to high quality complementary candidates so that there are certain niche skills and skills that continue to be evolved, all right, that we can bring them in and also train our local talent as well so that they can actually create more good job opportunities for our locals. Now, you keep harping on this thing about imposing a levy. It is easy enough for the government to do so because it generates revenue, right? But at the EP level, Mr. Leong, our focus is really on making sure that we can differentiate and we can get the best, the highest quality, the highest qualified talent anywhere in the world to come here. And if you look at it, employers do not have infinite budgets for manpower. We should think about a win-win partnership where we benefit, we let the employer win so that our or his Singaporean employees will also have that win. And that has been our intention. And that's why all of the policies that we focus on making sure that our economy is vibrant so that there's enough resources for us to continue to invest back in our people, to continue to develop Singapore, progress Singapore to a place that's brimming with opportunities, with hope, and with always optimism. I hope that you can put that aside and focus on bringing all of us together and building that Singapore for our future. Thank you. Because I think that is the core of what we do. Thank you.
I'm afraid, Ms. Siow, we've hit our 6:15 p.m. guillotine time, so you can't ask your second clarification.
Chairman, I want to make one point.
I'm afraid, Mr. Leong, we have reached the guillotine time. Thank you. Mr. Desmond Chu, would you like to beg leave to withdraw your amendment?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to thank Minister Tan See Leng, SMS Zaqy Mohamad, Mr. Dr. Koon, and MOS Huang for their indulgence in answering all our cuts to the best of their abilities and time. We know that it is difficult to keep the workforce competitive in the midst of difficult structural problems like aging population and geopolitical tensions. I hope that I have the appropriate lyrics to a Chinese song to thank him, but I don't. I can only offer him appreciation that it is very reassuring that MOM and himself will accompany the Singapore population through when they first get the first job to when they retire. With this, I beg leave to withdraw my amendment.
Is the honourable member given leave to withdraw the amendment? Aye. I think the leave of the majority is given. The amendment is withdrawn. The question is that the sum of $3,759,250,200 for head S stand part of the main estimates. As many as are of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The question is that the sum of $106,763,800 for head S stand part of the development estimates. As many as are of their opinion say aye. To the contrary, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.